Welcome to All Clear, Firefighter Health and Wellness. I'm Travis, your host. Have a very special guest with us today. We've got Dr. Robert Superko with Select Well. Now, this is a guest we've been trying to get on for a very long time. Dr. Superko, why don't you tell us about yourself and your interest in firefighters and their health?
Well, thank you, Travis. A little bit about myself. Let's see. You could think of me as a molecular cardiologist. So I'm a physician and a cardiologist, but I'm not the guy that passes the catheters. I'm the guy that tries to keep you out of the hospital. So my career has been in the metabolic and genetic aspects of heart disease, and we've had some fabulous revolutions over the past 30, 40 years. So we can go into some of those if you like. But that essentially ties in with the question you're asking, which is the firefighters and why we're interested in them at all. And as a young boy, every young boy likes to be a firefighter. So I remember running around with a plastic hat on. But then I got into my adult years and I lost touch and I didn't appreciate what the firefighters do until one day on 9/11, my wife Brenda and I think you've interviewed her on a previous podcast, we're in New York City at a medical meeting. And at that time, I was raising funds to start a laboratory, and I met with a group of investors in the World Trade Center. And the very next day was when the planes hit. And everybody in that company died except for the CEO because he was late getting into work. So that, of course, was a horrendous situation. And Brenda and I said, well, we have to get out of here. And we were putting on the speed to get away from New York City. And we noticed that there was one group of people that was running into the city, not out of the city, and that was firefighters. So that started us thinking, there's something different and unique about this group of people that are called firefighters. So we finally got back to Atlanta, Georgia, where we were working in hospitals. And on the evening news, the fire chief came on and said, I'm sick and tired of going to funerals for my firefighters. They're not dying in the fire. They're dying from heart disease. Is there anybody that can help? So we called him up and started discussing what possibilities we could do. And about 2 years later, I wrote a grant called the FEMA National Firefighter Heart Disease Prevention Grant that FEMA funded. And the purpose was to figure out how much undetected heart disease there were in firefighters, because nobody knew that. And if they do have heart disease, what's causing it and what kind of therapeutic options do you have to prevent them from having a heart attack? So your listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with a lot of the statistics, but about 70% of heart attacks in firefighters occur while going to the event, the fire, working the fire, or coming back from the fire. So there's something unique about your occupation that predisposes you to a 200 to 300% higher rate of heart disease than any other profession there is. So this was intriguing, not only because of what firefighters do every day, but because there's a scientific puzzle. And I think we've gone a long way in solving that puzzle.
It's interesting you talk about the occurrence of cardiac issues before, after. I'm pretty sure you're aware of the Hometown Heroes Act, which I believe, gives up to 24 hours after, some fireground activity that cardiac issues can happen. So we know that it's one of those things that you don't know exactly when it's going to happen. It could be immediate. It could be long term. But when you look at the trends in firefighters, typically when you look in the general population, you see people that overweight, diabetic, things like that. Do you think that the fact that firefighters try to be healthier, not always successful, but do you think that in any way impacts what you see in their cardiac health, or do you think it's other issues that are impacting it?
Well, it's a good point you bring up, because when you think of firefighters, you think of a very fit group of people that are doing a lot of physical activity and therefore not couch potatoes, if you use the phrase. So that was a bit puzzling. But what we found in the study was there are a number of things that really was associated with their coronary disease. So First of all, how did we figure out they had heart disease? Well, we did non-invasive imaging. So we did coronary calcium scans, we did carotid ultrasounds. We looked at all kinds of measures of atherosclerosis without actually passing a catheter into somebody. So that was our definition of disease, was the presence by any of those tests. And what we found was a number of interesting things. Number one, the most common association with coronary disease in the firefighters was insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance is a term sometimes called prediabetes, but during your life, as you eat something and your blood sugar goes up, your pancreas pumps out some insulin to make the blood sugar go back down, and that's completely normal. So you see this glucose goes up, followed by the insulin, then the insulin drives the glucose down and it goes back down. However, if you're not eating correctly, if you're carrying too much body fat, then your blood sugar goes up over the years as you get older. But it's combated by the insulin coming out of the pancreas. But the insulin coming out of the pancreas has to work harder and harder as, let's say, 10 years goes by. And so at the end of 10 years, you've had a normal blood sugar level, but the insulins have been gradually climbing. And the reason the blood sugar is normal is because the pancreas is cranking out more insulin. At some point, the pancreas poops out and it can't control the insulin and, quote, suddenly, unquote, your blood sugar goes up. Well, it had been going on for 10 years. And if you had known that 10 years ago, you could have taken the steps to prevent the onset of diabetes. So this is very common in the American population, well, in first world populations. And it was one of the primary findings in the firefighter study.
So when you start talking about, the insulin, could have figured it out 10 years ago, you would have been better off. Are there steps that a firefighter can take to better know their health, better know what situation they're in? Because I know in my family, my dad had heart condition that affected him for probably the last 20 years of his life. But yet on my mom's side of the family, they don't. So everybody's a little bit different in their genetic makeup. Does that have anything to do with what we see?
Absolutely. One of the things, one of the pieces of work I did, I was the chief medical officer of the company that decoded the human genome. That was back in 2001. And in the firefighter study, we did 500,000 genetic tests in every single firefighter. So we have this very nice database now on actual genetics related to all these measurements we made in the blood and whether or not they have disease. And so family history is extraordinarily important because it links to genetics. One of the genetic things we found was in the firefighters with disease, there's a proclivity to thrombosis. So thrombosis is where your blood clots, and your blood is always clotting and unclotting. But this propensity was a little bit on the high side for clotting. So now that would not normally affect normal people with normal jobs. But you take somebody like that and now you stick them with all your gear on and you increase the adrenaline because you're going to an event. And now you have to fight that fire and you get volume depleted and you get really hot and your volume contracts. And now that thrombotic potential increases, specifically because the kind of work firefighters do around the time of the event. So that helps explain a lot of this location. But there are other things genetically that contribute to coronary disease in firefighters and everybody. And I'm not sure if Brenda talked about Lp(a) when she was on your show.
I believe she did mention it.
Yeah. So that's one that's extraordinarily important, but also is prothrombotic. And we just have a paper being published recently about the use of aspirin to prevent heart attacks. And it doesn't work in most people to prevent a heart attack if you do not have heart disease. However, if you have high Lp(a), aspirin reduces the risk of having a heart attack right back down to normal people level. So those kind of things are clear piece of information that a firefighter could use. So you're a young guy, you have a family history, maybe your Lp(a) is high, which you know is either from your father, your mother. What's the actionable step? Well, it's pretty simple. It's take a baby aspirin a day. And that would reduce your risk as if you did not have the high Lp(a).
Well, you bring up a lot of good points there. And I know that Select Well does the physicals for the department that I work for. And you guys have helped me tremendously to understand my health personally through the blood testing and, the counseling that goes along with it. With all that taken into perspective and all of the firefighters that you've tested and all of the research that you've done, I know you mentioned how the unique work that firefighters do impacts, cardiac health, but a lot of times is short duration. It's like short burst of almost like a sprinter. Like you'll do really hard work for 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and then you might not do anything for an hour. Do those short bursts ultimately contribute to some of the issues?
That's a really good question, and I can't answer it. I don't have any data to respond to that, except there's one study of a group in Wisconsin where they geared them all up with Holter monitors and respirometers, and then their gear, and they sent them into a fire, a planned fire that they were doing. And so you could record their heart rate, you could record their blood pressure, record their volume. And as soon as they hit the fire, things just took off. The heart rate zoomed up, the blood pressure zoomed up, the rate of losing water increased. So all these bad things were happening almost immediately as they started that activity. So I could imagine that if you sprint for 5 or 10 minutes and then relax for 5 or 10 and sprint again, you have this reoccurrence of this up and down going on that could be very harmful to the health. So yes, I believe what you said is happening, but I don't have any empiric data to prove it, except that one study.
Sure, sure. Very understandable. And I appreciate the fact that you want to back up what you're saying with science. That's one of the things that is so important when you start talking about this. It's interesting. I've talked to a lot of not necessarily doctors, but I have talked to people, researchers that work with things like the gear that firefighters wear. Dr. Brian Ormond at NC State University, he's very knowledgeable on that. We've had him on our podcast a time or two. And one of the things he talks about is like the heat stress. The gear itself, just the amount of heat that builds up when you're in fire conditions or even when you're just standing outside in recovery, if you don't have that ventilation, it really stresses your body and it makes it harder for you to do what would be simple for most people. So no doubt what you're saying makes sense that you want to try to regulate your activity as much as possible. But do you think that regular exercise plays into cardiac health for a firefighter? I mean, we try to be active anyway, but do you think just regular physical activity makes a difference?
In terms of the cardiovascular health of firefighters, absolutely yes. It goes back to that insulin resistance issue. If you're not physically active and you're eating excess calories, you're going to put on fat, and that puts you in that pre-diabetic situation. If you exercise routinely, you also have effect on cardiovascular function itself. So the health of the heart muscle is improved. You're less likely to get the atherosclerotic plaques and the rupture that we talk about. So physical activity is absolutely important, but there's different types. There's aerobic, there's anaerobic, there's weightlifting, all of which are useful, I believe, in the firefighter profession. So there's no one specific activity, but a combination of several. So if you're just a marathon runner, for example, usually every marathon runner I've met are kind of scrawny, thin, no muscle, and they could hardly do the job at all. Whereas there's the Arnold Schwarzenegger guy who's basically, has a beautiful body and big muscles, but they're not functional muscles.
Right.
So somehow you have to get into this mid zone of doing several different types of physical activity, but it's critically important. Yes.
At Descript Master, we believe it's never too late to share your story. Our beginner friendly training is specifically designed for passionate creators over the age of 40 who want to harness the power of video and podcasting without the tech headaches. Now, whether you're a firefighter, a first responder, or an educator who's wanting to up your game when it comes to videos, podcasting, and digital media, or you simply have some wisdom you want to share, Descript Mastery gives you the tools and the confidence you need to create professional, quality content that connects. Start telling your story today with Descript Mastery. I know, talking about that, one of the things that I've been reading about, and I guess my personal research has been about functional strength, more or less replicate what you do, a full range of motion, not just doing push ups or just doing sit ups, but focus on a full range of motion. And, when you do that, it helps, number one, prevent injury, but also it helps you simulate what you're getting into. And I imagine that would go into play for your cardiac health as well.
Yeah, I'll tell you one quick thing. Years ago, this is 20, 30 years ago, the California Highway Patrol came to us when I was at the university there. And they said, we have a problem with all of our officers that are getting a lot of heart disease. Is there any kind of program you guys can develop? And we said, well, we could, but first we have to figure out how much energy it takes to do their job. So we got a bunch of scenarios, and these are activities dictated as necessary by the Highway Patrol. One was driving a squad car at 80 miles an hour through a chicane chute. And so we had EKGs on them. We had respirometers, and we could measure all this stuff. Another was carrying a stretcher with a victim up a 30-degree slope for 100 yards under X number of minutes. So we took the functional things that reflect what their job duties require, and then we could create a series of metabolic tests, which could be done in half an hour, to see if they had the ability to do all those different functions. So that's sort of what the point you're bringing up is, that you need to train for the activities you need. You don't need to train for something you're not going to do, like run a marathon, unless you want to, of course.
Of course, it makes sense. But, in looking at the cardiac health and all the research that you and your team have done, and now I think you guys are probably specialists, if not the best in the world, when it comes to looking at cardiac health for firefighters. Now, when you guys do the blood draws with Select Well, and you guys, go through and do the testing, what have you learned? What trends have you seen that are probably the most surprising to you outside of the profession?
The most surprising trends. Well, we've done a few studies where we've gone back and seen if we can affect the risk factors we found. So, for example, weight. And we randomized, this was down in Phoenix Fire, we randomized a large group of firefighters to just getting the lab results like you've gotten, or getting the lab results and then talking to a nurse that explains what the results are. And then look at them at 3, 6, and 12 months later. Have their cholesterol gotten better? Has their weight gone down? All those things we measured. And lo and behold, the group that the nurses talked to did highly significantly better than the group that just got the numbers. So I think one thing here is, if you go through a screening program, they draw your blood and do some tests and say, okay, we're done. How do you interpret that information? And how do you make it change your life? And that's where our program is really unique, because we have these cardiovascular nurses that are well trained in this area, and they actually spend time with each firefighter talking about their individual results. And for all the fancy lab tests that are done, I think the most important part of the program are those nurses.
And that is the truth. And this is speaking from being someone who's had the opportunity to be on the receiving end of that. A lot of the information I've received has helped me personally to lose weight. You might not be able to tell by looking at me, and most of my coworkers probably laugh at that. But yeah, I've lost weight. I have become generally healthier just from watching what I'm eating and listening to the advice and the guidance that was given. But to kind of take it one step further, I also took a copy of the results that I received from you guys and gave it to my physician that I've been going to for 25 years. And Dr. Roycroft looked at it, and he was able to not only take the information that I receive from you guys, but correlate that to my long term health and to kind of see how I was progressing. So people should never undervalue the power of preventative testing. I mean, I can't speak enough for that.
Well, thank you. We agree entirely with that.
Yeah, and I am excited that you and I are going to, I think, get a chance to teach together in a couple of months at the Safer Conference here in North Carolina. And one of the big things that I'm hoping people will take away when they come to the class is how a lot of the most effective medical things we can do, not just for heart, but in general, is preventative. You know, get the testing, take care of your diet, take care of your exercise routine, and those things will go a long way in helping you stay healthy in the long run.
And there's generally something you can do for any of those risk factors that we find. And most of those things are not expensive.
So, what things are you working on right now? What are you looking forward to maybe sharing with firefighters in the upcoming months, weeks, years? I know you never stop thinking and working. That's what all the folks around you say. And I'm just curious as to what you got on the horizon.
Well, this meeting coming up that you and I are going to speak at is one thing. And I want to make sure people understand the proper use of these tests, what they mean and what they don't mean. And so that might involve creating a newsletter, which we would put on our nonprofit. So Brenda and I also have a very small nonprofit that we started years ago, specifically to help firefighters. And we dedicated that to explaining the sophisticated aspects of some of these tests because they can get quite, you can get in the weeds with them. So one thing I want to do is make sure that people can understand what these tests mean and don't mean, not only for themselves, but their families. So one of the things that has recently started is that if the tests are offered to firefighters, then family members can get the testing as well. So that if it's something that's inherited, like the Lp(a) thing, then people in the family can all be tested. So that's important. We're very dedicated towards family health, and that's basically what genetics is. The information out in a clear form, and doing things like with your podcast is certainly what we want to do.
And you know, Dr. Superko, one of the things that I think you hit right square is the fact that if I get sick and I go down, my wife is going to be impacted, my son will be impacted, my department will be impacted, the people around me will be impacted. So the work you're doing isn't just impacting the firefighters, but ultimately it's the communities. And that's very awesome that you guys see the value in that and are willing to help families to determine where they fit into this whole situation.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because it reminded me that one of the pitches I made when I wrote the grant, the FEMA grant for firefighters, was the argument I made to the reviewers at FEMA was that heart disease in firefighters was a threat to national security. Because if you guys go down while you're coming to help us, the rest of us are out of luck. And so that's something to think about too. Another reason to keep a healthy firefighter population.
I always talk about how awesome you guys are in the information you give. And and the key, as you mentioned, is the follow up with the nurses, with the professional staff, kind of talking you through what you got going on. And once you have an understanding, you can better take care of yourself. So, like I said, we always point folks to you guys whenever we have people ask us frequently to our nonprofit, the Firefighter Cancer Alliance. Hey, we've got to do NFPA physicals. What do you think? And you guys are top pick to mention to go talk to these folks. Always send them to Von McAfee. He's my neighbor actually, not too far down the road. So it's really good to see that there are folks that are interested in the well-being of our profession, and that's few and far between. A lot of people claim they want to help, but it's when you actually step in and start walking the walk like you guys have, that it really makes a difference. And we do appreciate very much what you guys are doing. And I am looking very much forward to being able to teach and learn from you whenever we get together at the conference in August. So thank you once again. So if anybody wants to get a hold of you, Doc, what's the best way? How can they learn more about Select Well, about the work you've done? What's a good place for them?
Well, if they want to get in touch with me, email would be best. Telephone is bad because if I'm seeing patients, I don't pick up the phone. So I think the email is on your website, or should I
Yes.
say it?
No, it will be there, but you can mention it if you want to, but it will be there on our show notes.
Okay, it's get ready. It's highhdl at mac.com. So that's HIGH, high, HDL for high density lipoprotein. That's the good one, at mac.com. So it's a play on words, but get the HDL up primarily through exercise.
I got it. You know what? That really shows your dedication when you've committed your email address to your work. I appreciate that. And like I was saying, all of your contact information about Select will be in our show notes. But Dr. Superko, thank you so much for your time tonight. And maybe we can get you back on. And I think Brenda, we're going to try to get her back in here too. You guys are a wealth of knowledge, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
I'd love to. Thank you very much. And we'll see you soon at the firefighter meeting.
All right. Thank you so much. And as we always say here on All Clear, light your fire within. You know, at Descript Master, we believe it's never too late to share your story. You know, our beginner friendly training is specifically designed for passionate creators over the age of 40 who want to harness the power of video and podcasting without the tech headaches. Now, whether you're a firefighter, a first responder, or an educator who's wanting to up your game when it comes to videos, podcasting, and digital media, or you simply have some wisdom you want to share, Descript Mastery gives you the tools and the confidence you need to create professional, quality content that connects. Start telling your story today with Descript Mastery.